Good evening. We'd like to call this meeting to order. We want to welcome you to the work session tonight on May 3rd, 2021. We'd like to start with the Pledge of Allegiance. You join me? I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Mr. Chambers, can you call roll, please?
I can. Mr. Hilberg.
Here.
Ms. Pavlik.
Here.
Mr. Ross.
Here.
Ms. Parkhurst.
Here.
Mr. Skidmore.
Here.
Thank you.
There's an agenda that's been prepared and is before you. Are there any additions, removals, or modifications to the agenda? Hearing none from the board, if we could entertain a motion to approve it.
Make a motion, we approve tonight's agenda.
I'll
Thank you.
second.
Mr. Ross and Mrs. Pavlik, thank you. Any questions or comments? Hearing none, if you could call roll.
Mr. Ross.
Aye.
Ms. Pavlik.
Aye.
Mr. Hilberg.
Aye.
Ms. Parkhurst.
Aye.
Mr. Skidmore.
Aye.
Thank you.
Mr. Sable?
Thank you and good evening. I first want to start off by providing an update on the Medina High School principal interviews. I think during the last board meeting, we were either just beginning or had just finished the first round of screening interviews. Last week, I think it was Wednesday evening, we held a second round of interviews where we brought 8 candidates back. Those candidates rotated through 2 committees. The one committee, it was of our teachers. The second committee was of classified staff and administrators. Each of the committees generated their own questions, and we kind of sat in the background and listened and took notes as co-team members. We've decided last Friday to add an additional round of interviews. That's how good the candidates are, that we would like to bring several of them back to interview them a second time or a third time prior to going to the live streaming interviews. So this Wednesday in the afternoon, we're going to be interviewing 4 candidates, 2 of which are internal and 2 of which are external candidates. That interview is going to be geared around curriculum and instruction. It's important that we have a curriculum leader within the high school. So the Department of Instruction, led by Tina, is developing the questions for Wednesday. In addition, I anticipate we'll have 2 board members joining us for that interview to observe and be able to see the 4 candidates. And per last discussion, I think it was going to be Mr. Skidmore and Mrs. Parkhurst as president and vice president. And those interviews, just so you know, will be from 3 to 6 o'clock, and they're going to be right here in this room. We will be having final round interviews most likely next week. We're working with the broadcast station, the local broadcast station here in Medina, in order to broadcast those interviews live. Those will most likely occur right here in this room. The format of those interviews is going to present a question for presentation. So the candidates will have a question in advance where they can provide a more formal presentation. And I'm seeing it's actually 3:30 they start. I was off. After they do their presentation, then they're going to be asked a series of questions. We are looking at having a student or students present to actually ask the candidates the questions. We did send out, the end of last week, a form for staff members, community members, and parents of the high school to submit any questions that they think the candidate should ask. We've already received several of those, and Amy Busby and I actually spent a little bit of time today going through those. The way we're going to select the questions to use is we're going to look for themes, common questions, and then we're going to gear all those questions down we received to a smaller number for our students to ask the candidates. My goal is to still have a recommendation from those two finalists at May's regular board meeting, which at this time I think is very doable. Any questions about the interview process?
Mr. Sable, could you give an example of some of the questions that you've been receiving? Just curious.
Probably the most common question we've been receiving has been about mental health and mental health awareness for teachers, administrators, and how an incoming principal would address that issue. And that question appeared like it was coming mostly from our students. So that's something that really seems to be on our students' mind. Another common question is, what is the short range and long range goals of the candidate going to be in regards to coming into the high school? And then we had several questions which were very specific questions, which once we choose a candidate, we can provide them with those questions and they can follow up as they need to. But if questions are too specific, we're not going to ask it during an open interview.
And if the candidates were watching, hopefully they were taking notes on what questions are going to be asked.
And next up, we have the Board of Education Handbook, which has gone through the policy committee. And I'm going to turn things over to Dr. Kwolek and Mrs. Parkhurst. They put in the grunt work in terms of the handbook. I believe that the handbook is not meant for adoption as a policy, but rather as a guide to issue to board members as they're elected to the board, so they have some guidance on what it is to be a board member here in Medina.
Yes, so the Board of Education Handbook is also in public viewing on our board agenda tonight. So Mrs. Parkhurst and I worked with the policy committee as well, so Mr. Skidmore, and then the board has had this handbook as well. So we did put a purpose section on page 2. So I don't want to read the whole thing, but maybe I'll just read the purpose section, and maybe that would be helpful for the public too as well. So the handbook's intent is to serve as a quick and easy to use reference guide for members of the board, not designed to replace the policy manual, which is a compilation of the former policies. The public is able to access and utilize this document to better understand the roles and responsibilities of the Board of Education and its members. So there is a link to the full bylaws and policies of the board. And then it says the board will make every effort to review and update this handbook as necessary on an annual basis. So I don't know, Mrs. Parkhurst, if you want to add anything, but the intent was to kind of provide a manual or a handbook for board members, and then also for the public to get a sense of what it entails being a board member, responsibilities, and a quick reference guide for the most important pieces of being a board member.
Thank you, Dr. Kwolek. I agree. That was really mainly our purposes for wanting to put this together as a reference tool for board members and community members. One thing that is in here that I was hoping the board could talk about a little bit tonight is possibly having, we talked about this when Mr. Eastwood was on the board, but having a like an informational night for potential candidates since it is an election year. I believe Mr. Eastwood did have one, like I think he called it a coffee maybe, and I'm not sure what the attendance was like. But since it is an election year, that's something we did put in here about discussing having like just an informational session with 1 or 2 board members. We can't have more than 2, but is that something that the board would be interested in doing and hosting? I think maybe Mrs. Busby helped work with Mr. Eastwood to coordinate that last year, just to advertise when it was going to be and where. We could probably do that virtually this year, possibly. So just, I would like to entertain if anyone on the board has thoughts about hosting that this year, or not hosting, but attending or interested in doing that this year. I'm happy to be one of the board members. Thoughts?
And I think Mr. O'Call just put it up. It's on page 13, right towards the bottom of the screen.
I think it's a good idea. I was thinking that one thing that kind of crossed my mind was maybe, I know this year would be different because if we do get to do it this year on the short notice, but maybe in subsequent years, it would be one or two board members who are not up for election that year, because then it might be a little bit more unbiased maybe, or less pressure, I think, and would eliminate any awkwardness, because if you were talking to your potential opponent in the election. So, but I think it's a great idea. I did notice, because with the different handbooks that are out there, there's other districts that are doing the same thing too. So I think it'd be great.
And that's a good idea. And I've availed myself to phone calls too from individuals that have interest, and have spent probably 2 or 3 hours, at least this year, talking to people about it. So definitely, if we plan something, I don't know what the best timing of that is, but I think they have to turn their petitions in this summer. I don't want to say the date because I'm not sure which date it is, but it could be that we could still do this in June. But thank you for all your work on the handbook. It looks great, and I like the idea. It's a working document. On the way over, I was kind of thinking about making sure our negotiated agreements are in here too, and in our contracts for our top, our treasurer and superintendent. And we added you added the joint operating agreement, which is great, because that's something we always need to refer to, and we don't always have it at our fingertips. But I appreciate all your efforts on this. I know you and Doug had talked about doing this, and when we all got on the board, I know one of the things we talked about was getting a copy of the policies, and my understanding is it would probably be about a 3-foot long book if we printed all of them at this point.
It's like 3 or 4.
Probably. So
Okay.
so we would kill several trees just to print them for all the new board members. And they're on our website, board docs, our policies are out there. But what you've done a great job of, Becky, is accumulating them together so that the board can access a document that, and Chris, both of you, that can easily be accessed, just to be able to quickly get to those pertinent documents that are the policies that the board members most frequently refer to. So thank you for that. We appreciate your hard work with that, and you too, we appreciate all the efforts.
So maybe if you guys are good, what we'll do then at Policy Committee on Wednesday is kind of finalize it and then get it posted on the website and send it out to all of you, if there's no other thoughts.
Sounds good. Thank you.
Thank
Perfect.
you.
Thank you for the feedback, and a lot of the effort goes to Dr. Kwolek, because she's the one that really compiled all the information. So thank you, Dr. Kwolek, for all of your hard work on that. And then we'll be in touch with setting up something up possibly then for potential candidates, possibly in June. Thank you.
And I'm going to combine our next 2 items. The first has been a long-awaited item for discussion. I know it's one of the things I first heard coming into the district 5 years ago, and that's air conditioning. And the number 4 is facilities and redistricting. And I want to talk a little bit about facilities and redistricting before I turn it over to Mr. Burkhart for the air conditioning. As many of our community members know, and of course our board knows, we had started taking a deep dive last year into looking at enrollment across the district and discussing and beginning to make decisions regarding redistricting. What we did find last year in cooperation with the state is that we are in need of doing some redistricting at the elementary grade levels, and that's due to uneven enrollment at our buildings, along with building capacity across the various buildings. In addition to that, since we were talking about redistricting, we wanted to take a broad look at our district as a whole, and we had some ideas about making adjustments at the middle school level as well as for grades 5 and 6. Another part of that is the facilities. Our facilities were toured, reviewed, and marked regarding what kind of shape that they're in. And I always like to preface this with, our facilities are in very good shape, that our custodians as well as our maintenance crew really do an outstanding job, including in our older buildings, keeping them clean, repaired, and up to code. However, we do have some aging facilities, and Those include Fenn was identified, Heritage, Canavan, and Claggett. Those are buildings that are potentially eligible for replacement. That doesn't mean we would replace all those buildings, and I can't imagine we would even look at replacing all those buildings, to be quite honest. But what we did want to do is work with staff at the community and our board to make those very difficult decisions on what we may or may not do with facilities. That conversation started last year. I think we had our staff meeting and our very first community meeting, and then COVID hit and everything went on pause. This process of redistricting and facilities will be brought up again in late summer and early fall. I want to begin the discussion and start re-engaging our staff and our community to make decisions for the future. With air conditioning and the conversations that have come up, we have been hesitant with air conditioning simply because we didn't want to spend money we didn't have to. For instance, if we ended up doing renovations to Claggett, Fenn, Canavan, that's the time that would make sense in order to put air conditioning in those facilities. And it would also be a time where we would have a bond specifically to fund not only the air conditioning, but the facilities as well. This past year, dealing with COVID, really the importance, and not that we ever thought it wasn't important, but the importance of the HVAC units in the building and the circulation of air to keep students safe and healthy, as well as staff, really came to light. So we started having more discussions about what would it take to put air conditioning in the buildings, as well as how do we do it when we potentially have modifications or changes to those buildings in the not too distant future. We've been very fortunate, as districts across the state have, to receive Esser Funds. What Esser Funds are is those are federal dollars that are distributed by the state to school districts, and they're used for COVID relief. That COVID relief can fit under many categories. It can be curricular. Obviously, we've had to make a lot of adjustments to the curriculum and instructional delivery this past year, which costs money to make those changes and train staff. It can also be used for things like PPE, rubber gloves, shields, masks, detergents to wipe off the tables. It was also approved to look at air circulation in buildings and HVAC units and to help get them up to date in terms of the expectations for the filtering of air. So what we are looking into is utilizing some of those Esser funds. We anticipate we'll be receiving approximately $3 million in the coming year in Esser funds, which is solely to be used for COVID purposes. With those Esser funds, we wanted to ensure, I know I say it all the time, but we're here for teaching, for academics, for students, and we wanted to make sure that money was appropriately budgeted for those reasons. And we feel very comfortable with our summer programming and some of the programming that Mrs. Cassidy shared, I think it was at our last work session, that those funds are going to be adequate so we can start looking at other projects. So I asked Mr. Burkhart to look into some options for air conditioning. I know he's going to share at least 2 or 3 different options, one being if we went all in centralized air in all of the buildings versus maybe some less expensive approaches. And the reason why he looked into that is because we don't totally know what's going to happen down the road with the buildings, but we do feel like there's an immediate need to address the air conditioning issue. So at this time, I'm going to turn over to Mr. Burkhart.
Hi, good evening, everyone. Just to kind of remind everybody of where we are with air conditioning, I have building maps marked with areas that we have targeted to cool. So this first map is Claggett, second floor is on the left side, first floor is on the right. So we have a total of 15 rooms there that need addressed. There is a chiller in the building now that supports most of the rest of the building there. The next map down is Canon Elementary, and we have very limited cooling there as far as just in the media center and in the office area there with a cassette type system. So we have a total of 33 rooms that would need addressed there. And then last but not least is Canon Elementary, where we have pretty much most of the older section of the building that does not have air. So we've come up with, I think back in 2016 we first looked at this, and we were looking at it then with doing a chiller system and a new chiller in Claggett. We do need electrical upgrades at all three buildings, so Claggett would need an electrical upgrade to go along with that. So Ryan, if you could put up this sheet that's got the 3 different options so we can look at the numbers. So rounding it up, it was about a $3.5 million project when we started talking about it in 2016, and it's, we've added a little bit to, it was lower than that, but we added a little bit to it for inflation. Then we started looking at a different solution last year, which would be doing a VRV unit vent. So it's a heating and cooling ventilation unit that goes in each classroom. We looked at that primarily at Claggett and Fenn, and then at Canavan we have a furnace system in those buildings, so we would just change out the furnace in each individual classroom with an AC component to it. So that solution's kind of remained the same. The unit vent solution's about a $2.8 million fix to our problem. And then last but not least is what we looked at was doing window units at Fenn and doing the move and cool, which is like the portable cooling units at Claggett, which is the same type of unit that we've been renting in the past. And then at Canavan, we'd be able to do the furnace switch out with cooling. And for some reason, it didn't include the numbers. That's $925,000 is the total for that option. So just under $1 million. That option, I think we can accomplish this summer, but we would have to move really quickly with securing an electrician, getting on First Energy's schedule for whatever type of upgrade they want us to do, and then we would do the rest ourselves in-house, with the exception of Canavan. We would hire a contractor through the Ohio School Council that's kind of cooperative bid, so we could do that, but we'd probably have to declare urgent necessity and get moving right away on if we did that solution. The other 2 solutions, unfortunately, I think that if we tried to accomplish that this summer, we would run into equipment problems. The manufacturers are pretty overwhelmed right now with orders. So unit vents, and then the amount of work and labor that goes involved in switching out the unit vents in every classroom and the piping and all that sort of stuff. So those are the 3 options on the table, I guess, ranging from 3.5 to do it full out to $1 million to do a solution that, will cool the rooms adequately.
Thank you, John, for providing that. I know as far as lead times for getting, just try to get some appliances on order.
Yeah.
They have been out 3 to 4 months. So, and given the situation where we're not sure what the future holds as far as our middle schools, and knowing how oppressive the heat can be in the later part of the summer, and if we're stuck with the masks in the fall, I think it would be logical to go the window unit route, the portable air conditioning. I think we'd be able to accomplish that quicker. And again, as far as the cost, you never want to throw money. I mean, to me, it's not throwing money away. It's solving a problem that has been in the district for a long time. So, but that's my input on that. I'd be interested to hear what the other board members think.
John, thank you for your work with this. The VRV option, is that similar to like a hotel window air conditioner?
It is. It has both heating and cooling in it, so we're switching out the existing unit vents. So, you know, we'd be updating those, which
Okay.
would be nice to do, but again, that's 2 summers out.
Do we have any idea on how much sound that puts out as far as, you know, is it quiet
They
for
are.
a classroom?
We
Okay.
have window units at Garfield. We have the portable units we've used at Claggett for the past many summers.
So the portable solution, I mean, which is, it's $1 million, I guess, is what we're
Yeah.
talking, 1 million for the option to the right. So how long does that last, do we feel, that
The-
solution?
The life cycle of a portable unit,
Just roughly, I mean, is it
I'm gonna say
something,
5 to 10 years.
5 to
probably,
10 years?
Because, you know, they don't get that much use, but
Yeah, and I wonder about the window units, what their typical lifespan
we
is.
switch those out at Garfield, I wanna say every 5 years or so,
Okay.
5 or 10 years.
I mean, the Cadillac option is the 3.5 million, but I mean, definitely, I would gather that the age of some of these buildings we don't know the end result as far as what the recommendation will be on the buildings in the future. So to do something, I mean, every year come September, October, we're hitting days in the 80s, sometimes 90s, even into October at points. And I know that there's been times where the districts had to cancel class on occasion in certain buildings. And I think we're all more cognizant now of air handling after COVID, that's something that we want to be careful with. And so, I mean, I'm in favor of doing something. I mean, I'm excited that these funds are available. I'm excited that the district has the ability to use those funds for that purpose. Whatever your recommendation is, I think I would be curious to hear ultimately what the district would like us to do, but I think it's great that you've pulled all this for us, John. We appreciate it.
Thank you. The move-in cools would also have 2 sets of ductwork, so one to exhaust, one to bring in. So, you know, you would get at least that fresh air component there, and Canon having the new system would definitely improve air quality there, so.
Thank you, John. I just need some clarification. So on each of these 3 options, those would be for all 3 buildings, correct? It's not like we have
Yes.
one option for one building, because I thought it was my understanding that maybe not as much electrical needs to be done maybe at Canavan versus at Fenn, and would one system maybe work better at one building versus another, or?
Yeah, the savings we're seeing is we wouldn't have to do anything at Claggett, so that's pulled out of there because the existing power at Claggett would support the move-in cools. And potentially we can pull power from where we used to have modular classrooms at Canavan and Fenn. So we're hoping that, you know, there's adequate power there. First Energy and this electrician we're working with this week will give us that answer, but that might save some money too.
John, thanks for all your work on this. My question is, would you consider this just a Band-Aid, and then down the road, the goal is to get central air in all the buildings?
Yeah, absolutely. I think energy-wise, as far as what we'll use in energy, is not as good as it should be. As far as having proper air circulation in all the buildings, I think the unit ventilator is probably the better solution. Yeah, and you know, with technology advancing, who knows where we'll be, you know, when we get to that point 2 or 3 years of doing buildings.
But how far down the road do you think we are from the central air? And the only reason I'm asking is because, you know, if we spend the money now, then we have to tear everything down to do the big project.
Yep, I don't have an exact time frame. I think we'll hammer that out next year, but I can't imagine that any major district construction would be occurring for at least 4 or 5 years, just based off of our levy cycle and the need we would have to pass a bond issue.
For the bond, okay. And John, are these funds, these ESS funds, can you save them for a later date, or do you have to use them right now?
Yeah, we have 2 Esser grants still. The first one is Esser 2, and that runs out in 2023. And then we have Esser 3 funds, which runs out in 2024. So we have to have the money spent by September of those years.
And I completely agree with John that ultimately our goal is centralized air. Once we know what's happening with the buildings, that would be the time to implement that. I personally feel that the window and portable units, it is a little bit of a Band-Aid. We've had that Band-Aid at Garfield for years, and it's worked very well over there. But it solves the problem until we can figure out the long-term direction that we're heading. And it is a little bit different in each building. It is, if I'm not mistaken, a permanent fix over at Canavan, because Canavan already has much of the equipment in place with the new half of the building. And we really don't foresee anything happening with Canavan in terms of a tear down or anything like that. It's temporary at Fenn and Claggett, which are really the two more challenging buildings when it comes to the air conditioning.
This is really exciting, and it would be really, really great. I know we'd have families and community members and teachers who would be thrilled if we could get this done by the fall.
And I guarantee you, we haven't shared this with staff, so after tonight, I'm sure the rumor's going to be swirling come the next few days. But we do have a facilities committee meeting, I think, this Thursday morning. I think it'd be a good idea to bring this up with facilities, and maybe following the facilities committee meeting, we can make a final decision and communicate with that board, because like Mr. Burkhart said, if we wanted for the fall, we're going to have to move.
So I agree about it being a Band-Aid, and I hate taking that approach, but like it's already been said, with the concerns about air quality now, and not knowing how soon we're going to be able to do the major renovations at some of these buildings, I think the $1 million, especially since it's grant money that has to be used in the next 2 to 3 years, I think it makes the most sense to go ahead and use it and do the less expensive option now.
So sometimes you hear from the public and they say, well, we didn't have air conditioning back in our day and so forth. And, I think it's interesting, if you go to buy a car today, air conditioning is not an option anymore. I don't know of any car that it's an option. It's just built into it. So times have changed. It's 2021, and it is a more modern convenience that I think is generally expected. And I know it's something we've been trying to do for several years, so it's great that these Esser funds are available. So thank you.
And the next topic is joint Board of Education meeting with the city. We have a history of getting together with the city of Medina and having a joint board meeting to talk about how we collaborate as a city as well as a district. And right now we're looking at June 11th, which is actually our next work session. What I wanted to discuss today, besides informing the board of that, is your recommendations in regards to how to hold that meeting, because Lisa right now is trying to organize that with the city. What we have been discussing are some potential options. If we had it here in our district, this room would not accommodate. It would just be too many people. So we would have to look at another location within the district, which would likely be one of the auditoriums, the PAC or the middle auditorium. The city, we don't know yet if they have the room within City Hall. Just from knowing the facility and what we've had to work through the past year, I'm guessing that at least in the pit they have there, it probably isn't the room, but maybe if they put it up outside the pit. The other option that we've tossed around, and quite honestly, this one might make the most sense, is doing it virtually. And I know we've moved away from virtual meetings, so this would be specifically for this joint meeting with the city. But before we made a final decision with the city, I wanted to get the board's feedback in regards to that.
Mr. Sable, I just want to clarify, the date is June 7th. The 11th is a Friday.
Yes.
Okay.
You don't want to meet on a Friday?
No, not in the summertime. And I understand that there is going to be a larger amount of people, but I still think meeting in person adds just a different, more conducive work environment, especially with people who don't see each other on a regular basis. They can make those reconnections. You can have your little side conversations before or after. My preference would be for it to be in person in a larger venue, like you mentioned, either the middle stage or the PAC.
I agree. Not really much more to say than what Valerie already said, but I think my preference would be together as well.
My preference would actually be virtual, just because I think it would, sometimes it may be difficult to just find a venue that is large enough, as well as then trying to hook up whatever we need to hook up to broadcast it. It might be easier logistically and with technology to just do a virtual. That's just my opinion.
If we hold it in the PAC, Mr. Cole, I mean, we're now airing the orchestra concerts and the choirs from the PAC, right? So all the equipment should be there? Mm-hmm. Yes? Okay.
I appreciate the comments about being in person, and obviously that's preferable. I mean, I guess I'm always happy to not have to wear a mask, and I think if we can do virtual, that gives us that ability to not have to wear a mask and be able to communicate that way. I think, so right now I'd prefer virtual, but I'm fine with either way, and I guess the city, it's technically the city's meeting, I believe, so they would decide how they want to have it, and then we're invited to their meeting, if I'm not mistaken. So however, but it sounds like it's 3-2, that we're not voting on it, but that the board would rather be in person than virtual.
Well, there's still some other factors we need to work through, so Lisa and I will continue to communicate with the city. You are totally correct. This is technically the city's meeting, and I'm not aware of what their ideas in regards to holding that meeting are yet. And I want to make sure we talk to Jared as well, who oversees the Medina television station, just to make sure what will work for him. Because I don't know the nuances, and even if we utilize the PAC, we might be using the entire backstage to spread everybody out, and may or may not impact cameras. I don't know.
They've had a major renovation there at City Hall as well for that area. So Matt and Jared, and they can also do a hybrid. If that is something that's appealing, they're set up with equipment to do that as well from City Hall.
So we'll continue the conversation, and we'll keep the board updated as we move in, and I appreciate all your feedback. The last item is the Run for Fun. I wanted to put in a quick commercial for the Medina City Schools Foundation. They are holding their annual Run for Fun this Friday, which they are extremely excited about because last year's had to be canceled. The funds that they raise through the Run for Fun go towards our students, directly to our students. Most of those funds go in the form of scholarships for graduating seniors entering post-secondary, whether it's a technical school or a community school or a college. Those monies are also available to teachers through teacher grants in order to bring resources into their classrooms that maybe we wouldn't normally purchase as a district. I do encourage our community to sign up for the Run for Fun. Even if you don't want to run, you can sign up for the virtual race and do it on your own time. Obviously, the important thing is raising the funds to support our students. And I'm going to say it here, but Mrs. Busby has promised that it's going to be nice weather, because I think it's rained for the Run for Fun every year I've been here. And if there's no other discussion from the board, we do have a few action items this evening for necessary business.
I don't think we have anything else that I know of. Thank you.
The first action item for recommendation, it is recommended that the Board of Education approve the following service agreement for the 2021 school year. This is for Learn 21, and it's a approximately $22,000 contract. This covers Blackboard, Parent Portal, and data integration services. I do want to point out to the board that this was once approximately a $200,000 contract, especially with the Blackboard piece. That is something we've been phasing out for the past 3 or 4 years now. I believe we're in the final phase of that phase out, which means that just some staff have access to it so they can transfer all of their records that they've accumulated over to the Google Classroom system. The second item is personnel. It is recommended that the Board of Education approve the following personnel recommendations pending completion of all required paperwork per the Department of Human Resources. First, I want to congratulate Holly Weber. Holly has been the associate principal at AI Root Middle School. I want to say for 3 years, maybe 4, it might be 4. She's done an outstanding job there in her role as associate principal, not only dealing with the daily discipline, but even more importantly, working to help support the curriculum, instruction, and obviously most recently, the COVID protocols into that building. She is resigning from us because she has been offered a position with Avon Lake City Schools to be a head principal at one of their elementary buildings. Avon Lake is where we hired Holly from, so she'd be returning to her original district. In addition, we have a co-curricular resignation for David Kaufman, Director of Swimming. Following this resignation, our athletic department will be working to find a new head swim coach.
Thank you. Do we have a motion to approve these items?
I'll make a motion to approve these action items.
Thank you, Mrs. Parkhurst. We have a second.
I'll second.
Mr. Ross, thank you. Any questions or comments from the board?
I would like to thank Mr. Sable and his staff regarding this Learn 21 contract. We have seen significant savings in this over the years. So with transitioning, I know, to Google, which is Classroom, which is free, and we do appreciate the efforts it's taken to reduce our costs, but also give us a good product that we want something that works as well. My question, though, is this something that we do eventually see going away and no longer needing to use?
No. Yeah, we'll all, unless we switch companies, we'll always have this contract for data management. Go ahead, Ryan.
Yeah, we do. We use them for data management. We also use the one-to-one manager that they put out for our Chromebook management. And a large piece of this parent access is with the web page and with Amy in the app. So it's a lot of moving parts. The Blackboard piece was the largest piece of the contract, and we have eliminated that. So we're always, or we will have a contract with Learn 21. It just won't be as substantial.
Well, thank you. And like I said, I do appreciate, I know this used to be hundreds of thousands of dollars, so thank you for your efforts with that.
And I think also, too, the counseling department at the high school uses, there's a lot of information up there for scholarships, right? Where they can find the information and apply for scholarships.
I think
Which-
they've transitioned to Google Classroom, correct?
They've been moving all that information onto a webpage.
Oh, okay. So that'll be through Google then? Okay.
Okay, thank you. Here, we heard from the board with questions or comments. Any questions or comments from the public? Hearing none, if you could call roll.
Ms. Parkhurst.
Aye.
Mr. Ross.
Aye.
Mr. Hilberg.
Aye.
Ms. Pavlik.
Aye.
Mr. Skidmore.
Aye.
Thank you.
And the last action item this evening is the appointment of a board member to serve on the Board of Education for the Career Center. Here in public content as well as Mr. Hilberg's resignation. I know other board members are going to say something, but I want to thank Brian for the time that he's put into the Career Center. If you don't know, he's opened up a new business and restaurant, and I can't imagine the amount of time that takes for a new business, just growing up with a father who was a small business owner. So it's understandable.
Yeah, that's, and I just want to make sure everybody understands, there was a little bit more to it than that. Some of you are aware of the family health issues that we've had in the last couple weeks. So I'm trying to scale back a little bit and spend some more time at home. So that was one way to do it.
Brian, we do appreciate your service and thank you for that. And we're glad to have you continuing to serve here on Medina Board. So we appreciate that. It's my understanding that Mrs. Parkhurst would be available to do that position, I understand. So if that's the case, I would recommend that the Board of Education appoint Rebecca Parkhurst to the position of representative of the Medina City Schools to the Board of Medina County Career Center, effective from today through the balance. Did we get an answer if it's 3 years or if it's the balance of the term for Mr. Hilberg? Balance of the term. For the balance of the term. So whatever that date would be through the balance of Mr. Hilberg's term, due to the resignation.
I believe it's till the end of 2023.
Okay, very good.
I'll second.
Actually, I believe it's 2022.
Whatever that is, let's
This
just,
is-
let's
I'm in the second
leave it,
year.
let's leave it open that that she'll be appointed to the board to fulfill that term, okay?
Okay, you made a recommendation, you didn't make a motion.
Well, okay, that's a motion.
Okay.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Do I have a second to that motion?
Okay.
Okay, Mrs. Pavlik seconded it. Any questions or comments from the board? Just that I appreciate Becky being willing to do that. That's a lot of extra meetings and it's more time, even though they have really good food out there, which they do. So, so we hope you enjoy that part of it, especially the Christmas dinner. That's the best part of it. So you will enjoy it. And they weren't able to have it last year because of COVID. So I'm hoping that it'll be incredible this year. And they honor students there. So it's at that, you sit at a table with students from the Medina district, and every year we were just so impressed as we would hear the stories of the students, and their parents would be there with them, and what their dreams are and what they plan to do, and they were usually the top students from each program that were there, but we would get the honor to sit with usually Medina students, and it's a lot of fun. So I hope you enjoy it. So any other questions or comments? Hearing none, if you could call roll.
Yes, Mr. Skidmore.
Aye.
Ms. Pavlik.
Aye.
Mr. Hilberg.
Aye.
Mr. Ross.
Aye.
Ms. Parkhurst.
Aye.
Thank you.
Okay, and since we took action items and so forth, we have public participation. I don't think we have anybody from the public here tonight, so we will dispense with reading our rules there. But I do make a motion that we go in executive session to consider the appointment, employment, compensation of a public employee or official, and preparing for, conducting, or reviewing negotiations or bargaining sessions with employees concerning their compensation or other terms and conditions of their employment.
Second.
Motion and a second. Any comments? Hearing none. If you call roll.
Mr. Skidmore.
Aye.
Mr. Hilberg.
Aye.
Ms. Pavlik.
Aye.
Mr. Ross.
Aye.
Ms. Parkhurst.
Aye.
Thank you.
This evening, we'll have Jim Shields, Chris Kwolek, and Mina Pazitka joining us.
And we will not take any action afterwards. Thank you.